Now, getting to today's subject. You already said certain things about your own field and PPPs. Uh, this coronavirus is going to slow down the world economy, which has already slowed down. Uh, Due to that, a lot of reductions in the revenues, tax revenues of the public sector. Uh, Currently, I am working with one of the other United Nations agencies, HCR, High Commissioner for Refugees. They are suffering also the reduced contribution, financial contributions from the member states. But they still have to take care of 75 to 80 million refugees around the world. And their sister organization, World Food Program, they just got the Peace Prize, Nobel Peace Prize, and they are doing everything they could do. Lack of the funding from the member states, including the United States and Japan, they have to have private sector participation in order for them to perform their duties. So that's today's subject. Public works are not going to disappear. Infrastructure has to be repaired and built. Public sector is not going to have enough fund to continue what we used to do. But in Japan and in the world, private sector has the fund to help the public sector, but they have to have profit in assisting public sector. So that's where you two are saying PPP, public-private partnership, must come in. So if you can elaborate a little bit more of the need of PPP or private participation in the public works in Portugal, the United States, and we all work at the United Nations branch. If you can voice your opinions, I would appreciate it.
Yes, Sam, as you usually say, and I learned with you, and I keep repeating, and I know it's a motto of PPP class in Japan. I think everybody has to learn how to make new types of lemonade out of lemons. And I think the interesting thing about COVID-19 is that indeed it stresses the need for cooperation. Now, we all know cooperation is a very nice word, but it's probably the biggest challenge of humankind. How to work with each other and how to make and transform a challenge into a win-win situation. Just to go back to Portugal has 10 million people, the population, and we have now 80,000 people infected, so 0.8%. But one interesting thing, and talking about what is also interesting, is that everybody got worried, and we have a president that is a social democrat, which in Portugal represents the center-right. And then we have a prime minister that is socialist, which represents the center-left. And it has been very interesting because the two of them, the president and the prime minister, they agreed that this is time to act together. And so the opposition and the ruling party, they agreed to cooperate. And I would say, and going back to what David said, that public-public partnership should exist. And I think that's the most important thing that we have created out of this health challenge. And I would say that from this, we go to what you said, Sam, about having, I would say the public revenue has decreased a great deal because a lot less taxes are being paid, but also the cost of supporting SMEs and people in general that are now unemployed have increased a great deal. So on one hand, we have less revenues and we have increased the expenses a great deal. The point now is to how are we going to have a post-COVID recovery plan being implemented? And I would say that for these, I like to say strategically, for the very first time, EU has moved fast and has agreed to have a EU post-COVID-19 recovery plan. It's called the Next Generation EU, and there are three main focus. The first is the Green Deal. So we have to start after COVID-19 decarbonizing the economy. We have to digitize the economy, and we have to create a lot of jobs. And we have to create a lot of jobs, especially for the younger generation. And I would say that these are the three main pillars. And I like to say that it's, again, we have the people, planet, prosperity. Now, what has been very interesting, and I would say that in terms of political history for Europe, is that for the first time, the funds for this post-COVID recovery plan are being are coming from the EU. And so the member states, for the first time, are looking into an extra finance pillow that is not going to overburden the national budget. And this is a dramatic, very positive situation. What is very interesting is that when countries have to organize and write down the recovery plans, they have to align themselves with these new Green Deal, digitization, and creating jobs, particularly for the young people. But they have to leverage the public funding with private funding. And so I would say that the spirit of having private sector participation is already here. Now, the question, and I think, Sam, in terms of academic research, and it's very interesting to see, as you very well put it, the fact that we're talking about private sector participation and partnership spirit. Sometimes, and I think we will be talking about this in the future, in this conversation, but we have to realize and be honest about some people not enjoying the term public-private partnership because they feel the private sector is taking away the power and the business out of the public sector. And so I think the spirit of partnership is here. And now the question is, how are we going to implement this spirit? And I think there are two things. First, obviously, the SDGs. And I would say the consequence of the SDGs and the term coined by UNECE is the people-first approach to PPPs. So we are not only looking for economic prosperity, but we are also looking for protecting the planet and, above all, to leave no one behind. And I think the need of cooperation, the need of having private sector participation, and the need to have business plans that, on top of a rate of return and a positive NPV, we also have to bring in a social agenda and the planet agenda. I think this brings us all with great expectation to what PPPs can do on post-COVID recovery plans.
Thank you. Thank you. David?
Pedro brought up several very important points, and this need is universal. countries around the world, governments around the world, at the national, provincial, and local level are all going to be facing these extreme challenges in trying to help move forward from this pandemic. And one community that I feel is crucial are actually two communities. The first are non-governmental organizations, generally organizations that are in charitable or foundations that provide funding for human causes are going to have to participate in this. And they already recognize this. Many of the largest ones do. And these organizations have all together around the world almost $1 trillion in assets. Many of them operate off of the earnings of what they call a corpus, an amount of money that's been set aside. A lot of foundations, as we well know, are established by the very wealthy. And I think that the very wealthy are going to continue, hopefully, to add to that amount of funding that could be leveraged and utilized. But also, there's another community that has grown very rapidly in the past few years, and that's the impact investing community. Corporate social responsibility funds, environmental, social, and governance funds, CSR and ESG, they're the buzzwords that are being used now in many places. Those funds, Sam, the estimate of the total of these funds that have been set aside to invest in projects that provide social and societal impact is somewhere between 17 and 24 trillion dollars. There are various estimates. The total cost of adaptation, as I said earlier, is about 10 trillion. So, just taking, 50 or 60% of those funds and investing them would meet that need worldwide. And that community has become interested in public-private partnerships, especially since COVID, and have expressed interest in trying to learn about how public-private partnerships could work, how these funds could invest, what is being done to measure the impacts. And thankfully, the UNECE, International PPP Center of Excellence, that we are all affiliated with, has an answer. And it's called People First, Public-Private Partnerships, which does measure the impacts and also provides comfort in that if they meet these standards, these public-private partnerships are for the good of the people. So, that is in the midst of this crisis an opportunity to engage a new audience. We'll always have the availability to work with institutional investors, the traditional, the banking community, the insurance community, the traditional investors in these types of projects. But now we have a new potential participant that could work with us using the People First guidelines to implement these projects that can help economies around the world, because goodness, we know we definitely need that help.